співачку з нами, за що їй дуже дякуємо. And now I'm switching back to English. I think that we can slowly but surely start because everybody has a very limited time and attention span these days. So without any further ado, I will move on to begin the discussion. First of all, good evening one more time. My name is Artur Koldamasov, and I represent here the Pan-European Union of Ukraine organization. And as a part of the series called European Electoral Autumn 2025, we are doing this panel discussion titled Context of European Political Trends in the Results of Parliamentary Elections in Czechia. And it's such a pleasure to have such an interesting discussion with such an interesting topic with a stellar selection of panelists today. So it's a very big pleasure for me to present you to those three men, no pun intended. We are all standing for gender equality and etc. It's just happened to be this time that this is a very masculine panel this time, but nevertheless. We welcome, and also if I mispronounce your name, please don't be afraid to correct me. My Czech is not that good yet, but I hope that today's meeting will be an opportunity to improve it for some extent. Mіхал Лебдушка. Is it correct? Yes, I see the nodding. Okay. He's an analyst at the Association for International Affairs Research Institute. Welcome, Mr. Lebdushka here. Mr. Taras Jovtenko, who's the Doctor in Philosophy and National Security, Associate Professor of International Relations Department at Boриса Grінченка Metropolitan University, International Security and Defense Analyst at Ілька Kучеріva Democratic Initiatives Foundation, and also a person who has conducted a number of different interesting classes at my alma mater, which is the National University of Ostrog Academy. So nice to have you here. And Mr. Yonаш Sировatка, I hope it's correct, a postdoctoral researcher at Charles University in Prague, focusing on non-democratic political regimes, propaganda, and disinformation. It's so nice to have all of you here. And also, as a reminder to our audience, you can follow our updates on the social media accounts that we have. When you will try to Google the Pan-Europa Ukraine or Pan-Europe Kyiv, you will be able to find those profiles on various social media. And if you don't want to miss any announcements about future events, please stay tuned and follow closely those accounts, because we post the information about the upcoming events there. Also, we are very grateful to the Hans Seidel Foundation in Ukraine for supporting this event. And according to the conditions of having that event, the audience basically can fill out the survey about their experience regarding that event. I think it's very important for us. It's very important for the Hans Seidel Foundation to have that information. So we will be very, very, very grateful if you find a fracture of your time to dedicate to filling out that survey, because it helps us to make our events better in the future. I'm talking for a while now, and I think it's a good time to finally give the floor to our speakers. But I want to begin with a very short question so we can smoothly transition to the subject matter that we have tonight. I want all of our speakers, one by one, to describe their experience with researching the Czech politics and which exact subtopics or research interests do they all have related to the topic? Because, for example, we have mentioned that Mr. Sироватка is interested in propaganda and disinformation, and also, what about other speakers? Maybe let's start with Mr. Lebdushka.
Yeah, hello, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, very briefly to answer your question, I actually don't focus so much on Czech politics per se, but yeah, my research was mostly connected with Ukraine, actually, also Poland, Belarus, also. Yeah, I'm of course as a Czech citizen, I follow closely Czech politics and all the trends, and of course everything that deals with Ukraine. Let's say, and this is very important for this election, the future of Czech help to Ukraine and all those topics. So yeah, so this is something that I can basically talk a bit about.
Thank you, and this aspect will have a very important role in our discussion from the get-go. Mr. Žovtenko, what about your professional connection to Czechia?
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a huge pleasure to see you, Artur, in this very role, and to participate in this event. Thank you to all the guests and all the distinguished speakers. It's a relief for me that I'm not the only one who is not specialized in the Czech politics and in Czech domestic affairs. My specialization is maybe closer to what Mr. Sироватка would say after me, because I'm also into hybrid warfare, hybrid instruments and information and psychological operations, which mainly are conducted by Russian Federation and Russian intelligence services. And my scope of interest is the practical analysis of the hybrid practices and hybrid operations by Russian intelligence in the Eastern and Central European nations. And that includes Czech Republic, and that includes influence operations and how they try to shape the domestic political landscape in Central and Eastern European states. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll definitely be talking in more depth about it further on. Mr. Sироватка, can you please tell us more about those interests that we have already mentioned and about the scope of your research?
Yeah, good afternoon or evening, everyone. Obviously, my great pleasure to take part in this event and participate in discussion with my distinguished fellow panelists. I mean, maybe I would like make difference between, like, let's say, or I would answer in like two different ways to your questions. Like, obviously, the other things I'm kind of doing as a part of my kind of academic or kind of professional career, which are the projects related primarily with information security, social resilience, and kind of security policy. For example, I will be looking within the frame of one of my projects into ways how kind of the security policy is changing or maybe not changing under the new government. So that's definitely will be, yeah, so that's like one way how to answer your question. But the other way is that other possible answer would be that I'm interested in everything, basically, because my basic training is in political science. So I kind of had possibility to interact, or was kind of forced to interact as a student with every aspect of Czech policy, and kind of since then I already try to kind of keep myself being informed of that. So basically, feel free to ask me about anything, and I will try to my best to come up with reasonable.
Great. I could definitely relate to you because some people know that I mostly work with the US related topics, but here I am in Czechia for some for a chance, and also I worked on some topics related to Moldova, and physically I am in Poland, so I'm also kind of related to those topics. So yeah, I can definitely relate to those approaches of being open to different topics and different aspects of political science and IR research. Well, without any further ado, before we will move on to the first question, I also want to say that this event is live streamed on YouTube currently, and when everything will finish, basically, you will be able to find the recording of the live stream on our YouTube channel. And the second thing is about the questions. So, of course, we will have the dedicated Q&A section at the very end of this panel. In order to keep the flow of the conversation smooth and up to order, you can think about your questions, and after I will tell you that we finally have arrived to the Q&A section, you can put them either into the chat or you can say them out loud with your mics. So after all these technicalities discussed, let's move to the first question, and I will address this first to Mr. Lebdушka, because the echoes of Andrej Babiš's rhetoric about the further support for Ukraine and all other matters related to the subject matter, they actually sort of were also heard in Ukraine, and many people had some concerns about the initial outcome of these elections. And the question that appears in minds of many people who followed this election campaign is, why exactly did the topic of Ukraine become that prevalent in his rhetoric? And is it in some way connected to his political past? Because if I'm wrong, you can correct me, but if I remember correctly, it's his comeback to the government. And can you please brief us on basically why this became very prevalent in his rhetoric, and is it somehow connected to his previous political experience?
Okay, thank you. I am not so sure that that the topic was really prevalent in the electoral campaign, especially when it comes to ANO, the Andrej Babiš party, and his own rhetorics. There were certainly some that were mentioning Ukraine much more. Well, it was especially the parties of the still current leaving coalition, leaving government. That's very important topic for them was foreign policy and security policy. So they were mentioning Ukraine quite a lot. On the other hand, quite a big topic was Ukraine for the far right in Czechia and far left. And what is very important to mention is that the far left party or coalition called Statue, or which would translate as enough, didn't manage it to the parliament. So and this was actually the most pro-Russian and anti-Ukraine force in the election. Another one is the far right party SPD, which is actually in the coalition government. but its result was much lower than expected. So we can basically say that the anti-Ukraine rhetoric didn't work so much in the electoral campaign, and Andrej Babiš he certainly used it. That's for sure, but not so much. He was mostly occupied with domestic policies, actually, not so much with foreign policy or security. He was sort of, you would see during the electoral campaign that he was quite sort of even bored with the questions, or he didn't. He was saying things like please don't bother me with Ukraine. I don't want to deal with it. So it is more that he doesn't really care about Ukraine than that he would be anti-Ukrainian. This is very important. And when it comes to the rhetorics about Ukraine, then I would say that it was mostly based on economy, actually, because this is very important background for the Czech election. We had quite an economic crisis in Czechia after COVID and after the Russian invasion to Ukraine. Czechia was actually in one of the worst crises in the EU. For quite a lot of Czechs, quite a lot of Czechs sort of feel that they were better off during the governments of Andrej Babiš, before 2021. So this was very important part of the electoral campaign, and he was sort of focusing on economy, inflation, and those things. And Ukraine was actually part of this, mostly in the sense that have a look. We have this sort of economic crisis in Czechia. The people have big problems. So why are we spending money on Ukraine? So and we won't give a cent to Ukraine. So so this was actually mostly the rhetoric, but as I said, it wasn't that prevalent as it could be. And it was certainly much bigger topic for the far right, far left parties, but also for the current for the leading government of Petr Fiala, which was sort of also praising itself for its commitment to Ukraine and for the help that they provided to Ukraine. So this would be I would say the basic thesis.
Thank you. That's a very interesting observation. And now I want to ask something. Now I want to ask Mr. Žovtenko something related to that, because the observation here, as we heard, is that, as it turns out, the topic of Ukraine was not that prevalent in Ano's rhetoric during the campaign. But you are very active in the Ukrainian media landscape, and I'm sure that you were observing some patterns related to that topic too. And as I also remember, during the campaign, a few of Babiš's statements on the topic have made the national news and have made the headlines to some extent. So what is your observation about the way the Ukrainians, and specifically the Ukrainian media in that extent, have perceived that kind of rhetoric? Was it more about framing when, for example, in the big picture, as Mr. Lebdушка says, it was just about a few statements in the whole picture of the campaign, and it was about framing because it's related to Ukraine? Or is it about something different? in that particular case. What is your observation about the way the Ukrainian media have perceived those kind of statements and the campaign in general?
Yeah, thank you, Artur. Thank you, Mr. Lebdushka, for your input. I definitely agree with your assessments that this latest elections campaign in Czech Republic was not so much about topics which were focused around the Russian-Ukrainian war, but they were mostly about topics which were related to the kind of problematic issues in the European Union policies, and especially centering around the states of national economies, especially after the EU started this series of the sanction packages against Russian Federation, sanctioning the energy resources coming from Russia. And that definitely impacted the EU in general and the national economies of the EU members. So that's definitely the larger framework, which answering the question which Artur put was really missing in Ukrainian media. So again, the perception of Ukrainian media landscape was more focused on the topics which were related to Russian-Ukrainian war and to the possible continuation or non-continuation of the official political strategy of the Czech Republic, which, as we remember, before the elections was focused on different security initiatives which were centered to put more relief on Ukrainian armed forces and to, for example, gather resources to buy artillery ammunition in addition to what EU was obliged to provide to Ukraine, and in addition to what the US allies also promised as a package assistance to Ukrainian armed forces. And the Ukrainian media landscape has drastically reacted to this political statements of Mr. Babiš when he said that Czech Republic will not going to continue this policy of gathering resources and putting up the initiatives to continue the support of Ukraine. And it was kind of a shock to Ukrainian media and to Ukrainian society, but nevertheless, and now I'm speaking as a part of Ukrainian expert society, we were trying to balance the situation, and it was obvious that Mr. Babiš is following the general pattern of the kind of conservative populist political parties generally in Europe. I'm not speaking about Czech Republic specifically, but we know that this is the trend in Europe and in the West in general. And this trend was set up not a month ago and not even a few years ago. So this trend, to me personally, has started from Boris Johnson in the UK. And this general line of conservative populism, which led the UK out of European Union, was getting on track. And it was supported by the first election of Mr. Trump as the US president, and then this trend went throughout Europe. So this is not something which happens specifically in the Czech Republic, but this is something which we see all across the European Union. And so from this point of view, what Mr. Babiš said further on about the Czech security assistance to Ukraine was very well in line with those conservative and populist ideas. So Mr. Babiš said that it was okay to him and to his political supporters to support the idea when the European Union gives money to Czech weapon production facilities, and those facilities are going to make weapons which are going to then be shipped to Ukraine. So there is nothing wrong with that, as long as Czech Republic gets the money money and gets the paycheck from the European Union. And so this is something which the United States are currently doing. So they refuse to continue this strategy of supporting Ukrainian armed forces as it was accustomed by the previous Biden administration. But now we have this PURL mechanism within the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is basically the mechanism which supports the US selling weapons to NATO. And then the alliance distributes those weapons among European allies, and then part of those weapons go to Ukraine. So if we speak about the general hybrid influence of Russian Federation or other foreign actors in this very case, just like a little spoiler for maybe our further questions in the discussion, I think that this hybrid influence and this foreign influence into Czech Republic's elections and into domestic politics of the Eastern European countries is based upon these trends which are actually taking place in Czech Republic and in other Eastern and Central European nations. So the spreading of conservative populism is something which for example, Russian intelligence services trying to exploit to their benefit. And this is something on which Russia and the Kremlin try to base their hybrid influence techniques. Thank you.
Thank you so much for such an insightful answer. My question to Mr. Sировatka will be a little bit different because with these elections, we have a very multi-layered and complex situation in Visegrad Group. When we have Hungary with its own positioning on Ukraine, Poland with its, from one point of view, very proactive positioning on Ukraine, but from another point of view, a very complicated stance regarding the migrant policy and some other historical tensions. And then we have Slovakia, which is with the Fico government, also has its own position in Ukraine. Now we have Czechia. And basically, the situation regarding the topic of Ukraine and the Visegrad Group is pretty complicated. And my question is that, number one, how did these elections change the situation there, if changed at all? Because one of the parts of the question here is whether there were actually any changes to the situation there, to that Visegrad dimension of the Czech foreign policy. And the second thing, there are being, let's call it like that, rumors, the inside info, the insider information that when we're talking about the migrant policy regarding the Ukrainian asylum seekers and refugees in Czechia, now, with the change of the political situation in the country after the elections, the relevant Czech institutions are looking to follow the Polish example in that policy, and the Polish way to do things, to all those who are not that deeply aware about the situation with Poland here, is that it doesn't follow the practices imposed by the European Union, and the plans are to stop the temporary protection scheme for asylum seekers from Ukraine residing in Poland next March. So my question, I know that it's a lot to take, but Mr. Sировatka, if you can, repeating for you to kind of circle back and sum everything up. The first thing is whether there were any changes in the Visegrad Group composition and their approach to Ukraine, and how the position of other Visegrad Group members can affect the Czech approach to Ukraine further on after these elections, including in the migration policy approach?
Yeah, I mean, like, so maybe I will start from kind of observation that basically kind of Visegrad 4 wasn't much of the issue in the elections as such. I mean, it was already mentioned that like the international politics, obviously, then I think we can have to be a bit more nuanced here and kind of ask like for which particular electoral group some topic is important. So you would probably found some groups for which, like, let's say, support of Ukraine and like active, let's say, active membership in NATO and EU was very important, and decided to vote for some parties, but for significant majority it wasn't. And maybe something similarly can be said about the Visegrad 4, that you might have some very narrow segment of voters and consequently politicians who are saying, okay, we really need to look for platforms that are kind of, that allow us not to be, let's say, European Union, and we should really focus on cooperation in Central Europe, on cooperation within Visegrad for and so on. But this was really something that was very marginal in overall pre-election debate, and like the most vocal supporters of these ideas didn't make it to the parliament. So what my expectation here is, yeah, like probably more of the same in a sense. I wouldn't think that Visegrad will become very more kind of very more relevant after the election. One thing to watch probably is, let's say, the ambitions to kind of develop bilateral ties with Slovakia, which is kind of traditional, let's say, traditional Czech partner for like shared history, language, culture, etc. And there is already some sort of exchanges kind of going on between, let's say, between kind of Mr. Babiš and Slovak politicians, and there is kind of a lot of, let's say, positive sentiments around them. So that's something which kind of can bring certain level of change. And then there is also Mr. Babiš's affinity towards Viktor Orbán and Hungary. But here, I think it's very difficult to kind of see like how that kind of plays out, what will actually happen, whether it's kind of really will shape like Czech position on particular issues, or if it will be that like Mr. Babiš will try to kind of form some ad hoc coalitions there. Maybe some slightly different spin or your question. Maybe I would not necessarily look into Visegrad 4 only, but just a reminder, like party of Mr. Babiš is one of the parties of parliamentary group Patriots for Europe in European Parliament, which is kind of gathering all these, let's say, populist, conservative, or some of populist conservative liberal parties in Europe. So here, I think that we can see maybe some like new bit unexpected connections and alliances that will be kind of forged through this platform. However, Mr. Babiš is very much a person who kind of appreciates like this kind of personal ties, personal relations, let's say personal deals. So yeah, it would be really interesting to see like with which politicians will be kind of allying on the European level. And as far as migration goes, just a reminder, like there is around like 400,000, like really significant number. Like the Ukrainians by far the biggest minority living in the Czech Republic now. And here, I think the situation is very kind of open-ended still. Yeah, that I think that in many, despite some kind of anti-Ukrainian rhetoric that might be present, definitely in the rhetoric of some or in the campaign of some parties that will be forming the government, I would think that the government will remain very pragmatic about it, and they will kind of not to try to kind of change system too much if the system is working at least a bit. And I think, like, for example, from the economic perspective, like Ukrainian refugees are bringing, like, let's say, more money in taxes into the Czech budgets than they are kind of taking in the form of humanitarian subsidies. Hence, yeah, I don't think that there will be like strong incentive to really kind of change the system that is currently at place, or maybe there will be some kind of thinking in that direction, but I wouldn't think that that's the priority. But I think that Michal is kind of more kind of expert on like situation in Poland, so maybe he will have like some more kind of nuanced things to say. But that's my perspective on the issue.
Okay, thank you. And to follow your suggestion, I will give the floor now to Mr. Lebdushka on the Polish dimension. And after that, I will have another question to him on basically a different topic. So, Mr. Lebdushka, if you have something to add regarding that, the floor is yours.
Just maybe maybe very briefly about the Ukrainian refugees in Czechia. Then, well, what's very important is that the most anti-Ukraine, as I said earlier, the most anti-Ukraine party didn't get it into the parliament, and the another one, the far right, which is actually much more against Ukrainian refugees than Babiš himself and ANO is very weak in the parliament. So it's part of the coalition, but it's weaker than expected. So the question is, I would say, was if there would be some strong pressure from this kind of forces, and it probably it doesn't seem at the moment that there might be I think that there might be some symbolic steps from the government regarding Ukrainians in Czechia, but overall I agree with Jonas that it's very the government would be rather pragmatic on this issue, I think, and they simply know that Ukrainians are bringing quite a lot of money on taxes into the state budget, and they are quite important for the economy, so that there wouldn't be much changes. I would also maybe I would like to briefly return to the issue of Visegrad Group, maybe just very briefly. First, what is extremely important to mention is that Visegrad Group was always very diverse. It was never a single block of countries with some sort of similar policies. The countries usually agree on some sort of a few separate issues, but overall they are very diverse. The sort of perception that it's some kind of block of countries within the European Union actually emerged during the refugee crisis or the migrant crisis in 2015. So this was mostly. But overall, the policies are very different, and they will be. Andrej Babiš is certainly not Viktor Orbán or Robert Fico, and he will be very different. He also, and this is also important to mention, and I also agree with Jonas in this, that he will be probably seeking other alliances as well, because Babiš himself actually likes to show himself with the strong leaders in Europe. Also, his voters actually appreciate it. In the past, he was very often mentioning that Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, is his personal friend, and he is actually mentioning this. One of the actual vectors that he can turn to is actually France, and this is actually connected to his personal past. It's not that obvious, but his first foreign language is actually French. He is very Babiš is very he feels very good in the French environment, and he can so he can follow discourse as well. So this is I think important to say as well.
Good, thank you. My question to you now will be a bit different because it will be about the economic dimension of this campaign. You have mentioned that Czechia has faced a big, for its context, economic crisis after the COVID pandemic. As far as we know, there's also the issue of the industrialization gap between different regions of Czechia, and also the gap between the rural and urban areas. So what about all these contexts and all these aspects in the Czech economy, and which impact did it have on the initial campaigning and the outcome of those elections?
Well, for sure, as always, yeah, you can have observe different groups of voters and different regions voting differently, and this is very natural in all contexts in all countries, and Czechia is no exception in this. So so you would see the people in the big cities voting more for the parties of the current government of Petr Fiala. That's for sure. Also, one of the key differences would be in education. Like, the more educated people would also vote for the leaving governmental parties. And Andrej Babiš and his allies, they would have sort of more support in among pensioners. That's actually one of the group that is very important for Andrej Babiš. But simply saying, in the peripheries of Czechia. So yeah, it's actually geographically not so simple, because you've got for example, like the northeast Czechia to the border with Slovakia and Poland. So this is the Czech Silesia, or Northern Moravia, Silesia, with the capital in Ostrava. So this former industrial region, which was heavily voting for Andrej Babiš. It used to be left wing very strongly earlier. Also, another regions that are very strongly a bit different to this are actually in Bohemia, in the northern part of country to the border with Germany. Also formerly very industrialized, with huge economic and social problems. So those are all things that play their role. But also we have a lot of and quite a lot of analysts actually who are commenting on the elections. Were telling this, that there are actually quite a lot of this sort of internal peripheries. So you've got, for example, like the central Bohemian region, which is very rich. It's around Prague, but within all this big region, there are also some sort of sub-regions that are not well off, and they would also tend to vote differently. So yeah, there are for sure those differences. And as I said, it was the campaign was mostly about domestic issues, a lot about economy, and all this played role. And it is those differences are only very natural, and they are, of course, in Czechia on the same, I'd say, to the same degree as in other countries. So yeah, especially considering that we have and this is this very big difference to Ukraine and also other countries. We have one big center in Prague, which is much bigger than all the other cities, and and that's basically why this is the only Prague was the only region where Andrej Babiš's ANO didn't win, but they won in all the other regions. So this is also very important. This big difference between Prague and all the other cities and regions.
Thank you so much. My next question will finally touch on the topic that we have mentioned briefly in our previous responses, and I think that it can be directed to both Mr. Sироватка and Mr. Жовтенко. Because we were talking about the hybrid dimension, hybrid aggression dimension for this campaign, and all the amount of mis and disinformation that have appeared in as one of the tools of campaigning, let's say like that, in that case. Maybe we can start with mapping out the situation in general in the Czech media landscape, and then we can move to how the outside actors, in that case Russia, were trying to abuse the campaign cycle and were trying to plant the seeds of the social gap and dissatisfaction with the Czech politics in general. Maybe let's start with Mr. Sироватка. In that case, what can you tell about the Czech media landscape? Is it resilient enough to those hybrid threats? How did the campaign indicate that? And what were the trends initially in that situation? And then I will pass the mic to Mr. Žovtenko with a little bit of a different spin on the question.
I feel like when you think about the Czech media landscape, there are like two things that it's important to consider, and which makes countries somewhat distinct from the other countries, even in the region. I would say, like you have there like public media, meaning that the public media being public television and public radio broadcast that are kind of paid by, let's say, by all citizens by special tax for sake of simplification. But this tax is kind of going directly to the let's say to the institution. It's not kind of mediated through like political processes or ministries or state institutions. Hence, these institutions are independent and are kind of then having like kind of a list of things they kind of have to do, like, you know, like having, you know, like contribute to the culture, covering social issues, and also kind of facilitate the space for kind of exchange of opinions between different political parties. And when we look at these, and, you know, even though like all public media all over the world are kind of having their own kind of problems, controversies, and facing declining of trust, still you can see, and especially in the times of crisis, like this kind of information sources are like most reliable and most consumed by the population. So that's also due to their, you know, again, we could talk about problematic cases, but the thing is that they are kind of still like very high quality journalism, especially in comparison with other kind of available sources. So this is obviously a very strong tool that is kind of available here for kind of tackling like information operation, debunking falsehoods in information space, correcting politicians, and so on. Obviously, something to watch is that current coalition was kind of very hostile about these media, so we will see if they will not make any steps against them. The second thing which is important is that the from, let's say, mainstream media, like there is like, since again Czech Republic is not big country, so it's not a huge media market, so there is only a few large media houses, and in the recent, let's say in past decade, like these media houses become basically controlled by like Czech wealthy entrepreneurs. Let's be generous with the way how we call these people, and among them, one of them was, up to a certain point, Mr. Babiš also, which obviously kind of created a lot of kind of concerns about like whether this media which are kind of owned by him or indirectly owned by him are kind of biased or non-biased. And it still kind of remains the concern that, for example, if you have like rich billionaire who is kind of very much invested in energy, when he kind of just recently bought or acquired like significant share in one of the media company, like whether this company, for instance, will be kind of criticizing like environmental impacts of kind of coal manufacturing industry, then it's like kind of so that, you know, so that's kind of yet a different kind of way how to think about, let's say, manipulations and propaganda, potential propagandas in Czech information space, because you also kind of have domestic actors, let's say, controlling or might have influence on some media, let's say, and then kind of try to use them for their own political or like power or political advantage. And just very briefly on the election, like, as far as I'm aware, we didn't observe like some like large coordinated campaign that would try to kind of undermine, let's say, that would try to kind of attack like specific parties or kind of undermine the system. But I don't think that it's necessarily like the correct perspective. I think that when we are considering like Russian propaganda, we should try to think about it about like, let's say marathon, not a sprint, like something which is kind of the main ambition is kind of to be present in the information space, to kind of be able to, let's say, circulate the narratives that are kind of positive for Russia, and then at a time of crisis or at a time of opportunity to kind of spin some topics in a ways that are kind of that are potentially beneficial for Russian interest. One specific case from recent election, that was something we kind of experienced for the first time, that there were quite a lot of voices that were kind of questioning the legitimacy of the election and were kind of blaming the previous government from some sort of attempted manipulations of election. There was a lot of this kind of talk about so-called Romanian scenario, that's similarly in Romania, like the sort of deep state cooperation of like elites and elite journalists and elite politicians and elite state servants and judges will kind of steal and will kind of manipulate the election results and steal the election from ordinary people. So that was something that was circulating in different spaces in the Czech context. Also, some politicians were kind of playing a bit on that card carefully, but still kind of mentioning it. And you could see also Russia affiliated media who kind of try to kind of promote or at least kind of bring this topic on the table. But always there was this kind of interaction between like them and between the domestic actors who were already promoting these narratives.
Thank you. I'm seeing that some people have started typing out their questions in the chat, and we will go to those at the end of that discussion, because we still have a few questions to discuss as the main part of the panel. But if you already have something on your mind and you want not to forget to ask that later, you can already start typing your questions into the chat section. Mr. Zhovtenko, what about your observations regarding the mis and disinformation that has been somehow relevant to this campaign? Was this relevant maybe to the topic of Ukraine to some extent, if we talk about the Russian psychological operations and informational operations? Was it about something else? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Sироватка, for your case. I will jumpstart my answering the question from your point, because it represents generally what I'd like to start with, and this is the kind of a strategic pattern of foreign Russian propaganda and disinformation and misinformation campaigns. So one of the things we have to understand, which is directly connected to Russian information and psychological operations and to what is called active measures in terms of the foreign Soviet KGB, and this is a significant part of today's Russian hybrid toolkit. This is the specially crafted operations which are aimed at influencing the social and political landscape of the foreign nation. So the concept of active measures had its own track during the Cold War. And the Cold War propaganda differs greatly from today's Kremlin propaganda in terms of strategies, in terms of objectives, and in terms of toolkit. And one of the most significant differences between the Cold War Russian propaganda and modern Russian propaganda and hybrid operations is that the modern times Russian propaganda is focused on not so much persuading the target audience in something, but like you've said, Mr. Sировatка, in sowing distrust between different social groups, between the society and the political leadership, between the society and the political leaders and political parties, between the society and the democratic institutions and democratic processes. And this is the core of Russian hybrid strategy. So right now, Russian disinformation and hybrid influence operations, they are focused on disuniting the Europe in general and disuniting the parts of the democratic societies within the European nations. So it means sowing distrust in democratic institutions, in the elections, in the results of elections, the campaign leaders, and so on. Questioning everything and trusting nobody and no one, especially the official information, the mainstream media, the government bodies and institutions, and so on. And so this is the strategy which is naturally derived from what today's general communication and global information landscape is providing, because you simply cannot control the sources of information which your target audience can get its hands on. And if you cannot control the sources of information, you cannot possibly be sure that your influence campaign reaches your target. And so hence you cannot be sure that you can influence the persuasion of your target audience. You simply made your target audience trust nothing and nobody. You are sowing distrust within this. And then you are the next phase of this utilizing this Russian hybrid toolkit is when you sort the distrust, you are trying to exploit the actual problems and actual issues within their target audience, the social problems, economic problems, problems which are connected to foreign policy, and so on. So you are picking up the sharpest issues, and you are trying to exploit them to your benefit. If you have your own actors or you have your own favorite parties, like, for example, Russian Federation has in Germany, the far-right parties like AfD and so on, then you are trying to exploit those issues to the benefit of your actors within the country. But it's not so much with the Czech Republic, and hence we have seen that the Russian disinformation campaign and hybrid influence campaign was actually focused in sowing this distrust within the society for the Czech citizens to not to trust the results of elections, not to trust their outcomes, not to trust the elections themselves. So this is the key strategic aim of Russian hybrid influence, and we clearly saw it during the elections in Czech Republic. And of course, Russian propaganda, Russian hybrid influence exploited the problems which were connected to Czech economy, to the EU and EU policies. And in this case, it was also connected to that part of the EU policy which was directly close to assisting Ukraine. And we can be sure that one of the Russian strategic aims of this influence campaign was to try to at least shape the foreign policy of the Czech Republic, of the newly elected government of the Czech Republic and the executive bodies of the state, in order to lessen the assistance that Czech Republic is providing to Ukraine, especially in the terms of, as I've mentioned earlier, gathering resources and all those public and political initiatives which were aimed at assisting Ukraine, aside from the EU instruments and aside from the political tools which the official Prague was using. And in these terms, we can say that partially this Russian influence campaign was successful because, at least from the public statements of Mr. Babiš, we can say that a huge part of these initiatives are put aside. But nevertheless, they are kind of monetized, and once the European Union is going to fund the weapons production in Czech Republic, and there is no problem that those weapons would go to Ukraine. We can see that this Russian influence hybrid campaign was all the way within the strategic concept of Russian interference into the domestic affairs of European nations. And this is the general pattern of sowing distrust in within the democratic open society and within the democratic institutions and democratic procedures. And this has two aims: to kind of weaken the resilience of European nations and divide European nations between themselves and divide European societies and their political and military leadership. Because Russian Federation now sees that the key EU member states, they are following the strategy of solid support towards Ukraine, especially considering what's happening in Washington right now. And Russian Federation needs to create the domestic problems for those political leaders and military leaders of Europe who support Ukraine and who support the assistance to Ukraine. And so we can see that the case of the Czech Republic and the case of the Russian interference into the Czech elections fits very well into this Kremlin strategy. And we can also see that the same patterns Kremlin is using in interfering to the domestic policies of other European nations.
Thank you so much for the response. Everybody is so active in the chat section. I can't wait to give the floor to those questions too, but I have one last question before we jump into the Q&A. And I think it's a very interesting one. I want to ask both Mr. Sироватка and Mr. Lebdушka about this, because I think their background would be really interesting. But of course, if, for example, Mr. Žovtenko has something to add here too, I will give the floor to him too. So basically, there are some thoughts that those election results indicate a pattern when people in Czechia sort of, I mean, I don't think like that personally, but to quote, started to forget about things that happened during the communism era in Czechia. And my question when I hear something like this is whether this aspect was really that important in this election, and whether it's more about, you know, some politicians are good, some politicians are bad, but we are still sort of out of the communism, and we have this fresh memory of things that were happening to us during that time. And is there any sort of nostalgia for those times happening among some demographic groups in Czechia? And does it have any impact on the electoral patterns here? I know that it all sounds very complicated, but maybe let's try to untie this together. Maybe Mr. Sироватка, maybe can you, if you can, maybe you can start.
Yeah, I mean, happily. I mean, like, obviously, now we are kind of, you know, what we are talking here about are actually like these kind of, let's say, big narratives, like big stories that we are kind of telling to ourselves about like how our society functions, where we are, what are the values, what are the good things, and what are the bad things. And these things obviously kind of work for a while and then kind of get reshaped, changed, because like there is new generations, there's like different experiences, and kind of then kind of things kind of differently, and like some sort of like new narrative, new stories kind of emerges, or at least that's kind of my kind of understanding how these stories are kind of functioning in society. And therefore, you know, it's obvious that let's say mobilization, like political mobilization based on this story, like of this kind of story of like Velvet Revolution and like coming from communism to West Europe kind of had to, let's say, had to become like less and less strong like over the time as kind of people are kind of having different problems, and also as some sort of contradiction in the story kind of emerges. Just kind of remind everyone like when we had like presidential election in 2000, shame on me, I don't remember the year when we had like the last presidential election. Anyway, like when we had the last presidential election, it was a popular election, and there were like Mr. Babiš, someone who was kind of member of communist elite and like cooperated with Czechoslovak military intelligence. And then on the other hand, there was Mr. Pavel, who was also the member of communist elite and who was like elite soldier at the time. So then, if you have this kind of contradiction, then it's kind of obviously then all this kind of narrative about like, okay, we are kind of moving from communism somewhere else is kind of falling apart because, this story doesn't ring true anymore. Maybe but it doesn't mean that it wouldn't be relevant and wouldn't be used by some parties as a kind of way of mobilization. But maybe what I would suggest here, like to think about like the different, let's say, framework is kind of coming there, that it's not that much of the debate about was it better before 1989 or is it better like after 1989, but it's more kind of revision of 90s and transition to democracy. That basically what, for example, Mr. Babiš is kind of saying, like, look, 90s was terrible time because everybody, because there were like this kind of so much corruption, so much kind of money kind of got lost in the privatization, and we kind of lost this opportunity, and now we kind of have to, we as ordinary people have to kind of take the power from this corrupt elite who kind of came from the 90s. And this obviously kind of have also some resonances, for example, for people who kind of got socialized only in 90s, were not as successful in 90s, but at the same time, like, communist era doesn't tell them like anything, and they have no kind of reason to kind of relate to that. So I think that's, in fact, I think in Czech politics it's now on very interesting crossroads also for reasons of kind of age of people involved and so on. And then in, let's say, in next decade, we probably will see some like different kind of paradigm kind of shifting that will kind of frame the big story that will kind of frame the Czech politics, and will be different than debates we are having now. But that's my kind of interpretation. So more very curious if.
Thank you, Mr. Lebdушka. The floor is yours.
Okay, I am not sure if I have much to add to this, but yeah, maybe just a few thoughts. I also sort of think that the issue of communism slowly gets away from discussion and from the perception of people, because it's quite far away already, and we have all new generations that simply don't remember it. What is interesting actually, and what I would like to underline is that to some degree, I think that those topics actually work with the voters of the former government of the government of Petr Fiala, who were one of the things that they are very often arguing against Andrej Babiš is actually that he was an agent of the communist secret service. So this is something that's very strong in those anti-Babiš actually voters and voters of the former government. The same would be also, and this is connected actually to Ukraine and to the war, to the Russian invasion to Ukraine. So also those elements like the strong anti-Russian sentiment, which is to a large degree connected to the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968. So this would be rather stronger within the voters of the former government. And when talking about actually those historical narratives and there's actually one interesting thing that needs to be mentioned. Actually, it doesn't really play a role anymore, but this is just simply a curiosity from Czechia. The communism wasn't actually the only topic that was very important in the Czech debate. And if we move back to the presidential election in 2013, if I remember it well, so even in 2013, there was one of the huge topics of the election was actually the expulsion of German minority from Czechia. So we had until World War II, we had a huge German minority of 3 million people. They were expelled from the country after the war, and this is something that was very strongly rooted within the debate and the society, and this is actually something that worked in the election even in 2013. But it's not there anymore, obviously for obvious reasons. The topic of communism also is I would say weaker than it used to be. But if there are still those sentiments, then I would say that they are much stronger within the voters of the former government.
Good, thank you. Mr. Zhovtenko, do you have something to add to this?
Just one short observation, just to summarize the perfect inputs from my colleagues. While I was listening to those inputs, what immediately came to my mind was the one of the political statements made by Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban a year ago, when he was giving a speech on a rally in Budapest, and he said that the European Union is much worse than the Soviet invasion into Hungary in 1956. And so luckily we do not see anything like this in Czech Republic. And this is this striking difference, just I think it very well summarizes what my colleagues just said. This factor of the former communist regime and the influence of within the former Soviet bloc, within the Warsaw Pact, these things are exploited by the very direct pro-Russian actors like Mr. Orban, this exploitation is aimed at the very precise anti-EU sentiments and anti-EU narratives, which again, luckily, we do not see that much in Czech Republic. So I think this also adds to the arguments of my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, now let's move to the questions from the Q&A section. Let's move to those that we have in the chat. I see that the first two of them are similar in their thematic scope, so I will read them both right now. Olena Marchevska is writing, greetings, thank you for a very interesting discussion. I have such a question. How did the candidates use in that campaign the generation gap, meaning the generational conflict between the elders and youth, and the populist frame, elites against the people? Can we really talk about that decisively in the context of that campaign? That's the first question. And Denis Yurkovsky wrote, thank you for the discussion. I would like to ask about actions to resist populism's growth during elections. How can Ukrainian people take into account the experience of Czech elections? I think that I might ask, does somebody of our panelists want to take the floor and answer the question? I see some activity from Mr. Lebdushka. I see the activity from Mr. Zhovtenko. And I see some activity from Mr. Sироватка. Okay, so I'll give the floor to all of you. Let's start from Mr. Sироватка, and then we'll go in a typical order. The floor is yours.
Yeah, so very briefly on like this generation versus kind of elite, generation gap versus like elite and like people gap. I mean, like this kind of more kind of populist framing in a sense, like good people, bad elites. That's something it's very important for Czech politics. This is basically the part of like whole Mr. Babiš communication when he kind of, this is basically the one thing that he's kind of saying since 2013, and since it works, that's apparently something that kind of somehow resonates among Czech population. As far as a kind of generation gap go, there is something to be said about this kind of, let's say, elderly that are kind of preferring Mr. Babiš. So there is certainly some resentment there. But what I think is way more interesting is the things how the young people are kind of starting to relate to politics and which political opinions are having. And here I think it's quite interesting is that there might be at some point like hope that, okay, like young people, because they didn't live in communism, they will be super liberal, super cosmopolitan, super open-minded. But what I think we are seeing is way more interesting, that young people are kind of thinking for themselves, and they're like very diverse in their opinions. And you have like fairly conservative part of youth, and then like fairly progressive part of youth, which I think it's kind of, I would say it as a kind of good thing, if I can say, like normative assessment that basically young people are having their own opinions. And very briefly, like what can Ukrainian society learn from Czech Republic? Well, I'm very critical of Czech politics, so I would not really kind of, I would say I look somewhere else and look for better, let's say, better models than Czech Republic. But if I would highlight like one thing, maybe it's like the role of the president, because it's very kind of tricky role in Czech political system. This is, let's say, it's kind of very rather vaguely, or like according to constitution, the Czech president doesn't have many authorities, many things he can do, but especially since he is elected since 2013 by the people, this person has like huge legitimacy and there's huge public demand for him to do something. So this person is kind of in, let's say, kind of pushed to both directions, and if the president behaves responsibly, it can be a great problem for a political system because it gets into huge disbalances. But so far, our president, I think, was very restrained. He was kind of very much kind of saying, I will respect the results of the elections, don't believe any disinformation that are kind of going around about the fact that election will be kind of stolen. And now I think that still let's not get into more detailed government debate about government formation, but I think that he is still fairly kind of restrained and fairly transparent. So yeah, so far I think like our current president is kind of good example how president in our system.
Thank you. Mr. Lebdushka, the floor is yours.
Well, maybe firstly, on the question about the elites versus people. I think there is also necessary to mention that this is of course very obviously the topic for the far right, far left parties. So even maybe even strongly than for Andrej Babiš. So this is also very strong. But actually, this is something that works on also from the other side. If you have a look on the voters of the former government and on their campaigning actually, and some of their patterns, then you can see that there is something which is actually quite opposite, and it was you could clearly see it on the campaign of. Especially of the party STAN, so those are the independent mayors, and their leader Vít Rakušan, who's still is the Minister of Interior. So he was doing campaign actually in Czech peripheries, where he was sort of doing the series of what he called debates without censorship. and he simply went to some sort of local pub in the regions where the people don't vote actually for the former government, and they had plenty of materials where the people were simply yelling at him, and they were very vulgar against him, and this was sort of also kind of message towards the voters of the former government that, well, have a look on those people. You don't want them to decide about the future of our country, and and it was sort of also a message to mobilize them. So this is it works actually.
Sorry, my apologies. But as far as I learned, currently Mr. Zhovtenko has to move to another event in a few minutes. And I'm so sorry for interrupting your answer, and we will go back to your answer right after his answer, so you will be able to continue. But now I give the floor, unfortunately for the last time for tonight, for Mr. Zhovtenko, because I remember that you wanted to answer this question so bad.
Yeah, thank you very much, Artur. I'm sorry, I really have to leave in a few minutes, but this is the first question from the chat, which is directly connected to my expertise. So, and I wanted to add to what my colleagues had already very precisely and correctly elaborated, and I wanted to add to the part of this narrative, people versus elites. And this is kind of a very old-fashioned narrative of Kremlin propaganda, and it was heavily exploited even during the Cold War. And again, this was aimed at trying to discredit the democratic political system and open society institutions, democratic procedures, and so on. And so right now it's also very heavily exploited by Russian Federation. It's both part of their foreign propaganda narratives, which try to separate and disunite the allies, not only in Europe, but even especially across the Atlantic, to have this rift between the key allies in the West, but it also a part of the Russian domestic propaganda narrative when Putin's regime is trying to set itself aside as the most efficient type of government. And although it tends to be something in between authoritarian and totalitarian regime, it tries to discourage people to look to democratic political systems and to try to demonstrate or to depict that the European and Western style democracy is something which malfunctions in the first way, and this is something which cannot be applied to Russian Federation, to Russian people, and so on. So this is kind of setting a bad example for the Russian people, for Russian citizens, and to underline this contrast between the so-called efficient Putin's authoritarian regime current and the constantly malfunctioning Western and European democracies. When they argue upon every issue, they cannot reach any collective decision, and so on. This is which the Kremlin. This is something which Kremlin is heavily exploiting, and if we speak about trying to counter these narratives, the first thing which needs to be done is to reshape the communications between the society and the elites, between the society and the government, and to take into account the social media, which is the new and very powerful instrument of influence, which Russian propaganda utilizes, and it tries to counter this this social media to make the opposition, to make again the rift between the social media and the so-called legacy media. And we all know that the government bureaucracies are very slow in communications. They are very slow in their reaction to disinformation, propaganda. And in this case, when you are slow in reacting, you have to be proactive. So you have to define the future problematic issues which could be exploited by Russian propaganda or by any foreign influence. And you have to set your own narratives before your enemy does, before the opposition does. And so this is the key to solving this problem, because when you only focusing on debunking the propaganda and debunking disinformation, you're always one step behind your enemy. And this is not very good, both on the physical battlefield and in the information sphere. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and have a good time with your further arrangements. We hope to see you soon in the future events. And now I give the floor to Mr. Lebdушка to finish his answer in calm and peace right now.
Thank you very much. So I actually finished the first part of my answer. So I just wanted to focus on another question. So this is what can actually Ukraine learn from Czechia. Jonas already mentioned the president, which is important in the political system. We've also mentioned actually the quite strong and good public media. So this is one of the things. And I would say I would add to this also some sort of design of Czech political system and some of the institutions which are actually quite good and are creating some checks so that the government can't really change the system. This is firstly, we've got bicameral parliament, so there is not only lower house which was elected in those elections actually, but we've got also the Senate, which is being elected on a different basis with a different system, and the senators have also different terms. So they are elected for 6 years, 1/3 of them every 2 years. So this usually creates the different majority in the Senate than in the lower house, which is actually quite good for democracy. But most importantly, I would say we've got very good, very strong and independent constitutional court, and this is something that the government can't influence at all, because the judges of the constitutional court are elected by or nominated by the president, and they are approved by the Senate. So this is something that's also one of the important checks, and it is a huge difference to other countries of the regions. I'm talking about Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, where those institutions doesn't really work well, and they are strongly politicized, and this is actually not true in Czechia. So so like, for example, the constitutional court is very good backstop within the system, and the new government has no chance of changing it.
Thank you so much. Well, we ended up in a very interesting situation of 2 guys from Czechia against 1 guy from Ukraine, which is a very interesting balance to be at. But we still have 2 more questions, and I will read out one from Anna Kushnir. Thank you very much for such an informative meeting. One of the first headlines that appeared in relation to the outcome of this election was about the difficulty to basically launch and create the new coalition. And this looks like an example of the fragmentation of the Czech political scene. Can you please give a short overview of the main Czech political parties, and to talk a little bit about how the situation is looking like with that at the moment? And what are the causes of that particular, I might not call it drama, but okay, for the linguistic purposes, I would do that. Drama with the coalition formation. Who wants to take this? I see Mr. Sироватка, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, like, first, I mean, it's like kind of long-term process, and here, like, Czech Republic is by no means like exceptions. It's something would be like this fragmentation is something we kind of see everywhere, basically in all Western style democracies. In Czech Republic, we can go like back to 2010 when we kind of have like some very unexpected parties like kind of appearing in the party system, and then like like number of reasons could be there, like basically like old parties not able to catch up with the development, not all parties not able to kind of incorporate like new members, oligarchization of politics, like overall like kind of fragmentation, societal fragmentation, and so on, like a lot of different things. I don't think that Czech Republic is like somewhat specific there. Interesting thing that kind of happened after the election that we all were kind of thinking, or like a lot of analysts were kind of thinking, okay, it will be very difficult to form the government majority. I mean, in the end, it turned out, despite the fact that like the number of parties in the parliament represented now is the highest that ever been, like in the end, it turned out that Mr. Babiš will have way better position because of his very good like election results, and also because the fact that the parties that were kind of previously in opposition or were completely new were also quite eager to kind of join the government because it's kind of it was the chance for them to kind of promote their kind of ideas and so on. So maybe just to kind of give a very short overview of who is around at the time. So basically we have like a populist ANO party led by Mr. Babiš, who will be kind of the main force behind the government, and he will be very likely the next prime minister. His partners will be the far-right SPD, who is kind of around for like basically 2013 and is very strictly controlled by its leader, Mr. Okamura. Then as other coalition partners will be newly emerged conservative party Motorists, and in the opposition we will have like coalition Together, which is kind of center-right coalition of three other parties like Civic Democrats, Top 09, and Christian Democrats. What's going to be interesting to kind of see whether this coalition will not kind of, because it was kind of only electoral coalition, which kind of succeeded in few elections, but this coalition might kind of fall apart, and these three different parties can go in different directions. So something interesting to watch. Then there is this, let's say, Liberal Party, Myers and Independents, and then there is Progressive Pirate parties. So actually, when we are talking about fragmentation, what I think we will see is that in fact, like the opposition to Mr. Babiš will be like in fact very fragmented, and there will be obviously, because these parties lost, they will be changing their leaders. So there might be a lot of kind of rethinking of strategies. So in fact, it might end up for Mr. Babiš kind of quite comfortable ruling, because there will be like no strong one speaker for the opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Lebdушка. Do you have something to add?
Not much, but yeah, just very briefly. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the Andrej Babiš found the majority in the parliament very quickly, so there was no some sort of complicated coalition negotiations at all. The problem is still with some names of the potential ministers. So yeah, there is discussion with the president at the moment. So this is something that is being sorted out at the moment. But in general, the process is actually quite standard, and it doesn't really last a long time at all. at this moment. Adding to the fragmentation of the parliament, it is worth mentioning that there were actually on the lists of some of the parties, there were actually people from other parties as well. So this makes the parliament even more fragmented, actually. And this is on the Pirates Party, there was one MP which was elected is from the Greens, actually, but it's just one MP. So that's as far as I remember. But most importantly, within the far right SPD party, there were like out of 15 MPs that were elected on the list, 5 of them are actually from other far right parties. So this will be actually quite important and quite interesting to watch, because they are at the moment supporting Andrej Babiš and his part of the coalition, but they might actually create some problems. Although still without those 5 MPs, he will still have the majority. They might be problem. And also there could be some sort of interesting dynamics on the far right in Czechia. So that there can be some sort of competition between those parties for the future.
Thank you so much. And we come to the last question from the chat by Sofia Dmitrenko. Good evening. Thanks a lot for this event. And I have a question. For a vote play in these elections, and how did the technical specifics of how it was organized this time influence the results? Thank you in advance for your answer. Does anybody want to take the initiative? And yeah, I see Mr. Sировatka. You can go further, and afterwards, again, if Mr. Lebdушка has something to add, we will wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's like interesting peculiarity of these elections, because like there's like for a long time there was like the electoral system was same, and we had slight change in relations to people living abroad. I mean, I'm deliberately using this term, not the term diaspora, because I wouldn't say that there is actually Czech diaspora living in abroad. That basically you have people who are kind of migrated elsewhere, but you don't have diaspora in the sense that you have like strong communities that are kind of having strong ties between themselves, are visible cultural presence at the places where they are living, and are having like strong connection back home. Yeah. So and also this is like not that many of the people. Yeah. So maybe think it in that terms, like basically Czechs living abroad at the time. And there were attempts to kind of because previously the only way how they could vote was to kind of go physically to the embassy and vote at the embassy, and there were made the arguments that it's actually putting the threshold too high. For example, if you are in Canada and you are living on the one side of the country, and then you should have to go like all the way around to go to the embassy, that this is not comfortable for these people. Hence it was allowed the postal voting for them. And there were some assumptions that it could be like around even like 80,000 people could participate. There was quite a lot of kind of bureaucratic exercise about it, because Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it was first time for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to organize that. There were also some, let's say, hoaxes and disinformation around it, that this way will be used for electoral manipulations. And there were also some, I don't think, not completely unjustified claims that basically government parties decided to do that only because they hoped that their own voters will turn up in higher numbers than the voters of previous opposition. Like in the end, not much that happened. Like there was only like 22,000 people kind of registered for this, let's say this voting, and even less probably kind of use this option anyway. And also there was a change because previously, like all votes from the abroad were calculated, let's say, for one of 13 election districts. So kind of those, let's say, 20,000 votes from abroad could make at least a bit of the change, especially if kind of affiliated with smaller district. But now the situation is that basically a large electoral district, which kind of makes even lesser of kind of impact for the votes abroad on like overall results. So one would say that in fact, like this change that would kind of should empower diaspora or like Czechs living abroad, in fact, kind of diminished their relevance for the overall results, which is kind of interesting paradox. But at the same time, there is interesting comparison we can make with Slovakia, when they also having something similar, and like there is already quite substantial Slovaks living abroad are kind of voting in that way. But again, like it took, let's say, 15 years for kind of people to kind of learn how to use this option to kind of start to plan and, you know, for it to kind of being established. So maybe, I don't know, if you have like similar discussion in 2035, the votes for Czechs living abroad might be quite significant, but this year around it wasn't that thing.
Thank you so much, and Mr. Lebdushka, you have the honors of the closing note for this discussion. So I pass the baton to you. Maybe you have something to add regarding that question. Maybe you have something to add in general. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, this is actually something which is my experience because I'm living permanently in Poland, not in Czechia. So so I usually, actually, which is a bit funny, but I usually vote in Lviv, not in Warsaw, because it's simply closer to where I live. Well, in general, there was this sort of assumption that we need to allow people to vote by post because in some countries it's very difficult. Like, for example, if you're living in New Zealand, there is no embassy and you have to travel to Australia and so on. So this was a bit complicated, and especially in the times of COVID, for example, when the people simply couldn't travel and couldn't vote at all. But in general, there really were some sort of discussions that this could influence the election, but in the end it showed up that just very few people vote abroad actually, and there are simply very few people, very few Czechs abroad comparing to other countries like Poland, Slovakia, Ukraine as well, of course, and we could see. Like, for example, in Moldova this year, that the diaspora actually decided the election, but this is not the case of Czechia, and the diaspora is very small, and it can't really influence the result at all.
Thank you so much on such a interesting and great note. I want to thank our dear panelists for answering all those questions and staying for that long and finding the time in their schedule to talk about their knowledge and their thoughts on the things that are happening in Czechia. Thank you so much also to all who have managed to pull through to the very end and stay with us. I hope that this discussion was very insightful and interesting for you. With a little tear in the eye, just want to say that this was the last event in the series about the European electoral autumn. Unfortunately, this is not our fault to the extent because we're approaching to the winter. So that's life. But in any case, thank you one more time. Reminding you about filling out the form from Hans Seidel Foundation that you can find now in the chat section. for that meeting. And thank you, дякую to Mr. Лебдушка, дякую to Mr. Сироватка, and remotely, but after the meeting in the social media, дякую and thanks to Mr. Жовтенко for his inputs. I hope his spirit is still with us despite that arrangement. In any case, thank you very much one more time for having this discussion with us. Follow our social media accounts not to miss any updates about future events, because we do a lot of very interesting things. My name is Artur Koldamasov, and I was very honored to moderate and host this discussion, and hope to see our panelists and also all of you sometime soon during our future events or for any other instances. Thank you so much, and thank you for your support for Ukraine.